Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Ford Foundation. I am so excited to see you today. Our first Ideas at Ford 2023. And this occasion is a special one because a friend of mine wrote a book. And he is a provocative guy. His name is Anand Giridharadas, and he writes the kinds of books that make us think. That make us think hard, that challenge conventional wisdom, that sometimes even if you are the subject in the book, you can get a little frustrated with him. But the thing you know about this guy is that he is committed. He is committed to the pursuit of justice in this country and the world. And he does the hard work of research, of interviewing literally dozens, hundreds of people for every book he does. It is supported with rigor, with evidence, and with heart. So I ask you to join me in welcoming Anand Giridharadas.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Always good to see you, Anand, at the Ford Foundation.
Finally found out what you thought about my last book.
I loved your last book, especially chapter 6. So you have written, so this is your third book.
Fourth.
Of course, so sorry, I've only read 3 of them. But certainly you have some bestsellers. And this book, The Persuaders, is a different book. I have so many places where I have rabbit-eared your provocations.
This is how all books should look, by the way.
Well, I
Just
truly,
destroyed,
I
annotated.
truly was last night at 11 o'clock, truly saying, I cannot believe he wrote this. So,
To be clear, you read it once before, so you were not just cramming last
no, I wasn't cramming at all.
This guy does his homework. I'm just saving your reputation here.
Thank you. So Anand, so this book should and could be called The Dissenters Who Rejected the Great Write-Off. So the Great Write-Off, this is a term that I've never heard before, but as I read the book and as a recurring idea, I was very compelled by it, but it also could offend a lot of people. Talk about the Great Write-Off.
Well, thank you all for being in this beautiful basement, the most beautiful basement in New York City. It's really fun to be back here and always to be in conversation with you. My third book, Winners Take All, was about a different kind of write-off, tax write-offs, as a way of changing the world. This book is about another kind of write-off, writing off other people. And though the tax write-off issue is very serious in our democracy, I would argue that the issue of writing off other people in a democracy is quite literally fatal to the project of democracy. And I think we all know this great write-off, because I would challenge anybody in this room to say you haven't done it. I've done it. We all do it. It's sort of the vibe of America in 2023. It's the vibe of a lot of places. I try to write my books about one place, but then I go to other places. We were just in India. People said, same thing happening here, right? Turkey, same thing happening here. Britain, same thing happening here. And the great write-off is basically, those people will never change. They'll never change their minds. They'll never change their ways. Though anti-vaxxers, they're just always going to be anti-vaxxers. They voted for Trump once, they'll always vote for Trump. They're white, they're always going to cling to their privileges. They're Marxist, socialist, queer city dweller, they will always be that, so on and so forth. So much of our discourse starts from the premise of fatalism about other people ever changing their mind. And the The reason I felt it was worth writing an entire book about the Great Write-Off, the crisis of the Great Write-Off, and people who are trying to overcome it, is because if you think about what we mean by the word democracy, we mean hoping to change things by changing other people's minds, right? And we forget that for almost all of human history, this is not how we did things. We did things by assigning one guy, almost always a guy, in the village or the region or the kingdom or the town or one guy, just to make all the group decisions that land in the inbox of any community. Do we let those people into the village or not? Do we kill people who wear their hair long or not? Do we drain the lake in the wintertime when it freezes or not? Do we pay for children's schooling first or old age pensions? Group decisions throughout history were made by one guy or a small number of people. And in the last few hundred years, we started on this very radical thing called democracy, which must have seemed insane to people.
Well, it was a radical idea. It's why today what seems so normative, but the notion of democracy, when it was introduced, it was a very radical idea.
And it was radical even when it was propertied white men in America only. Even that seemed radical by the standards of that day. Mm-hmm. And by our standards, not radical at all or enough. And what they were asking for is not just voting, right? We in some ways fetishize just the act of voting. What they were saying is the best way to make group decisions in a society was through a roiling, rollicking, 24/7, 365 conversation among all of us about everything all the time. A big, long haggle, perpetual haggle, like marriage, but just on...
Priya is on the second row there.
Oh, I always
Fabulous
forget.
Wife.
I always
we
forget
love
she's
Priya.
in the second row. Yeah. And that whole notion that all of us talking about everything all the time is the best way to choose the future is actually so rare in history. It is so precarious as a system. It is the most remarkable idea in the history of the world, I would argue. And it depends on the notion that I might be able to change you through talking, and you might be able to change me through talking. And when we give up on that idea, as I believe we have in our culture increasingly, we are actually giving up on democracy. So, I didn't write a book about the Great Write-Off. I wrote a book about people who are refusing the Great Write-Off and who are doing work in the trenches of our democracy, in big spaces and in small, obscure spaces, to show how you reach people you need to reach, how you pull in people who you might not think you pull in. And they are doing remarkable work. Their intuitions and experience about how to do this taught me so many things. I didn't know most of the skills that I write about in this book. It was an education for me, and I hope it serves to help a lot of people who are tired of losing in this moment to anti-democratic, hateful forces, but also tired of belonging to a pro-democracy movement that is more devoted to keeping people out than pulling people in.
So let's talk about a couple of profiles. The book, is just as with Winners Take All, is able to narrate through the voice and lens of some really remarkable characters, many of whom we know, some we've never heard of, at least I've not known. So starting with Linda Sarsour. I mean, iconic, very progressive. Certainly people think she's on the left. And what you described here was a moment of reckoning for her with this notion of writing off others.
So November 2016, I'm going to assume for a lot of people in this room, not the most exciting month. But if you feel otherwise, you're welcome here too.
Because we're not writing you off.
Right. And there was this question of what is to be done now, right? Many of us asked that question in our own ways, big, small, organized, not organized. And this thing that eventually called the Women's March came together. And I tell this story in the book of Linda Sarsour, a Arab-American Palestinian activist whose first instinct was, I'm not going anywhere near this Women's March thing that is developing. This is a kind of white elite feminism that she had kind of learned from experience to keep at arm's length, a kind of feminism that she felt did not address a lot of the needs in her communities beyond being a woman, right? So issues like equal pay and reproductive justice were great for those kinds of circles, but in her community, being deported by ICE was a feminist issue because it happened to a lot of women. And the kinds of feminist circles she had seen from a distance or had encounters with didn't really care about ICE as a feminist issue, so on and so forth. So she kept her distance. And then she and some others, women of color activists, decided the moment of Trumpism required actually not that kind of writing off. That was her own kind of writing off. And she said, it's not going to work. We need to actually have imperfect allies and imperfect, unwieldy alliances if we're going to build a big enough coalition of resistance against this guy and this movement. And so Linda went, as many people did in that time and in that era, went into a coalition of the uncomfortable. And she gives a really powerful account, I think, of what it means to go into a coalition of the uncomfortable. And this issue or this kind of specific coalition might not be your story or your experience, but I think we are all, in one way or another, faced with this choice of what space do we make for imperfect allies and alliances in our life, right? It might be at your university, you're a student. Is there a professor who kind of has their heart in the right place on these issues, but doesn't really get all the new pronoun stuff and doesn't really understand a whole bunch of just things that they weren't trained on in 1938? Is that professor your enemy if they broadly are sympathetic to you but get all this important stuff wrong? Or are they an imperfect ally that you want? That's something, you could apply this to every organization any of you are affiliated with.
But Anand, everyone is feeling this. I mean, so this notion of absolutism, perfection in all of the performative acts of progressivism, all of this, I think a lot of people feel, and you do such a good job of diagnosing in all of these different settings. But what's the solution? I mean, are we saying to progressives, you're overdoing it? We're overdoing it? We're harming the movement? What are we saying? What's the message?
I think one of the themes of the book, there's a certain genre of criticism of progressives or of the left that is just saying, these are a bunch of intolerant people who have no space for other people in their movement. And I want to be clear, that is not the sum total and substance of my critique, because I am incredibly happy about increasing political correctness, increasing wokeness. I think the term wokeness should be taken back. I went to school in this country in the 80s and 90s when things were not that woke, and it was painful a lot of the time. And there were things that men and boys and white kids could get away with that are just harder now, right? This country has moved in a direction of progress that I am really grateful for, and those were progressive victories. My critique is not about, you need to have a movement that never calls out anything or never gets angry. You need to have a movement that is committed to these deep values of equality and inclusion and justice and loudly for those things. And at the same time is expansionary. Is just like a business that is pulling in more customers every day. And you have to find a way to do that, and this is what the book is about, without compromising on the stance. You don't pull in more people to your coalition by saying, okay, fine, pronouns are not important. The answer to the transitional anxiety and transitional stress around some people, many people not getting what this pronoun thing is not to abandon pronouns.
What is it?
It is to on one hand, stand very clearly in the knowledge that this stuff is important, explain why it's important, and have a loving, merciful attitude in a vast continental country where a huge number of people were not socialized in any of this, to say, we are self-confident enough in our movement that you don't have to figure this all out outside our movement and only then come in. You can come in and figure it out on the inside.
But what
We
if
can
you're
teach
in the
you here.
movement and you're just tired and burdened by the trauma of years and years of having to explain to people, and they're still looking at you and making the same mistakes
Correct.
and expecting you to say, I excuse it again. And I mean,
This is the line we're walking, right? And I think if we take either of these principles to the extreme, you can take it to the extreme that we just are so merciful and so tolerant about every infraction that our movements are just trauma centers. Or you could take it to the place where, it's just so rigid that unless you have fully realized your perfection as a re-educated woke person, you can't get a membership card, in which case Ron DeSantis is just going to be the permanent president of the United States. So I think, and this is a harder message than selling either of those polarities, that we have to be ambidextrous here. I think we have to have the ability to hold the line about behavior and standards and at the same time be expansionary. And one of the things, most of the people, it's not a big advertisement, but this is a book largely about women of color doing this work.
and just on that point, because I know they got questions, but we have to get to Loretta Ross.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
So Loretta said, I was actually going to
my
quote
gosh.
Loretta just then, so that's a perfect segue. Loretta says something that's really important that I think gets at your concern. She says, this work of trying to pull in what I call the waking. Not quite woke, not fully asleep, the waking. The work, and the question that I asked actually in a speech in 2017 that became this book at the Obama Summit in 2017 was, is there room among the woke for the still waking? And the book, in a way, became my attempt to answer that question, right? Loretta says something very important, which is some people are going to have to get involved in this work of dealing with the waking. But no one has to do that. It is voluntary. The people I'm writing about in this book want to do that work. Loretta says, I was a young black girl living in all kinds of communities around this country, mostly white military communities. And so she says, I just, as an instinctual thing, never having grown up in any kind of stable black community, never having grown up in a stable white community, she said, it's really easy for me, Loretta, to do the work of talking these people through why that's... But she said, if you're, and she says in the book, if you, on the other hand, have that kind of trauma of having to correctly gender yourself every day for the first 25 years of your, adult life, you don't have to do that work at all. She says, do the work that works for you. I think the distinction that I find very powerful in her is some of us are going to have to do that kind of small e evangelizing among the waking. And other people need to be doing other things. We need other people to be calling people out relentlessly. And this is where I deeply dissent from the people who are just critics of call-out culture. I absolutely want some people standing on another watchtower doing the calling out.
But how do you talk about infractions, but some would argue that there doesn't seem to be an understanding of the variation of infraction, and that the violation merits only one resolution.
Correct.
Which is automatic, 100% canceled. So the infraction, whether it is seemingly a small microaggression or something much larger, the response is the same.
And what Loretta says about this is so powerful. She says the problem is we actually don't have, in a lot of these system situations, workplaces, universities, a process, an actual process for accountability, forgiveness, just actually, so professor misgenders a student. I think, a professor, let's say, whose heart isn't right, not as some anti-trans professor, but a professor makes a mistake. We need to be able to hold in our head the fact that, yes, that is actually problematic. You don't grow the movement by just saying it's not a problem, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. For that student, it's absolutely a big deal. But if you don't have a process for how do you deal with that particular level of problem, there should be a process, a certain kind of meeting, a certain kind of structure. If you don't have that in place, then students without much leverage or power may turn to the forms of leverage and power they have, which is creating a social media pylon. And I don't think you can also blame them for gravitating to a form of power that is available to them when, as a university or as a workplace, you have not invested in creating structures to deal with that thing in other ways. The way we have arbitration and we have this and we have that. We have developed structures over time so that things don't always go to a 10, right? And I think we haven't done that with a lot of this stuff. But Loretta also talks about, on this kind of issue, we need better threat assessment, right? And I think that's a very powerful concept for progressive forces. It is problematic that the person over here speaks in ways that are hurtful, doesn't understand the experience of a whole bunch of people in the space, and in this moment in American life, there's people over there who are trying to murder everyone like you. And I think it's important to be able to say, that's really troubling and we should do something about it. And for now, let's focus on that person's shooting at us, live rounds, And she says, if you can't tell the difference between people who are kind of part of this awkward national transition we are going to see and recognize and take care of a much wider array of humanity than our ancestors ever did, if you can't tell the difference between that and people who are trying to exterminate you, you're doing bad threat assessment.
So how then do progressives, people who have felt disempowered in some way, how do progressives build coalitions if the resolution or at least the remedy in your mind for this diagnosis is coalition building? How do you do that when it requires the change of such fundamental, foundational bias, prejudice, racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism? All of these phenomena are very real in our society today. And so how does one think about engaging in the public square when so much of this toxicness is the lake in the square?
It's such a good point, and I think when you went through that list, I think a lot of us, you work in these spaces, I write about these spaces, these ideas, these problems, it's really easy to be focused on the litany of threats right now, especially, to the kind of world we want. And what it's easy to get distracted from is articulating the world we want. The goal of the left is not to eliminate Islamophobia and things like it. It is to live in a certain kind of world, right? But it is easy to forget in the articulation. If you read any, Democratic Party fundraising email, you've probably gotten 322 today, because it's off season. I would challenge you to find one of them in your inbox that describes what the world looks like when they win. What would it be like to have seen your last health care bill? What would it look like to have paid the last tuition bill ever paid, because that becomes free. What would it look like for women to move through this society with the same fearlessness that men are able to? I think because there are real, increasing stack of problems to address, there is a risk of getting lulled into being a crisis naming movement or a problem identification movement or like a ism buster movement. And it just distracts people from articulating what the world looks like when we win. It doesn't mean you don't talk about those things. Those things are in the conversational soup, and I have a whole chapter on messaging that talks about how do you talk about those issues in a kind of intellectual sandwich where you're starting with deeper chords of values, shared values, where you're able to do something I think these movements struggle to, which is remind people that you're actually much more patriotic than the other side. You know, there's an embarrassment about patriotism in many progressive spaces, and I think it's a misplaced embarrassment. There is nothing more patriotic than the pursuit of racial justice, gender equality, justice for LGBT folks. I mean, who is a braver American than some 13-year-old trans kid who just realizes that they're safer in some city where they know nobody than with their dangerous parents in Oklahoma and gets on that bus? Who's braver than that, right? If we can't turn that into an amazing story about American patriotism, we deserve to lose. You know, we have conceded the idea of patriotism to people who kind of shoot beer bottles in their backyard, cosplaying for some civil war that they hope happens. Those men who elevate their pickup trucks by an extra 12 inches, do not own the idea of America. You know, people who have actually turned their back on the American flag and now just have some police flag on the back of their car do not own my idea of America. We have too easily given up on the notion that it is actually the trajectory of opening up what the founders promised but were not brave enough to implement to all human beings. That vision is profoundly patriotic. And so we risk being this kind of squad of people who are just against a whole bunch of things, when in fact the truth is there is a real and positive and powerful and thrilling vision of human flourishing in the United States of America that is actually what we are selling, and we often forget to sell it.
On that note, it's time for questions. So I would invite any of you who have questions for our author to go to we've got the mics on either side of the room. I invite you to ask your provocative questions. And question, that is a sentence that ends with a question mark. And it is not preceded by a soliloquy or mini lecture about something that is not really germane to the question.
Sounds like you've done these before.
This nice gentleman is going to kick us off. Please tell us your name and your question for Anand.
It's such a great one, but I would actually say that the issue, as I understand it, is that if you look at the right wing and the far right in America today, it actually deeply believes in the power of persuasion. Right? Fox News is not a news channel.
On the other side.
It's a persuasion. It's like a psychological machine, right? It is built on the idea, right? Like MSNBC, which I work with, covers immigration by, you know, welcome.
I take just goes.
MSNBC covers immigration by reporting on what's happening in Washington, what the latest bill is, whether it's going to pass committee, just like covering national politics, right? Fox News will find some undocumented person who allegedly killed some very pretty white girl in California, and it will turn that into an immigration story for 8 days. Why is it doing that? Because it actually believes in the power of persuasion. It believes that there are people out there who are not rabid immigration hawks, who are not against people coming in this country, who could be if you repeat the story of like Amber's murder for 8 days. That reflects a profound conviction in persuasion. And my concern is powerful actors actually really view every American as someone who could come into their movement, whereas movements actually fighting for all, actually fighting to open up power, extend power, share the blessings of liberty with all people, are more suspicious about whether other people could ever actually truly come into their movement. And this sets up a very, very dangerous paradox where the dehumanizing, exclusionary movements believe in pulling people in, and the inclusionary, humane movements think it's too hard. And this is setting us down a road to perdition that I don't want to really live in.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Ty Jones. I wanted to ask you about distraction. I'm somebody who believes that the conditions were met a long time ago to allow somebody like Donald Trump to be in power. So when we look at the foundational things like monopolies or Citizens United, if those things seem like they're not in place, or what's your opinion? If those things aren't tackled head on, do these other things that we're talking about actually act as distractions?
It's a great question. I mean, as was the argument of my previous book, I am someone who thinks those structures are the thing, right? They're the fundamental facts that we're all floating above. But I'm also of the view that you can't change a lot of those things unless you win much bigger coalitions than we have. Now, it shouldn't have to be that way. I would love to get rid of money in politics by a simple majority vote, or, and there is enough support for that. But it's going to take literally amending the Constitution, which may not be something that ever happens again in the American future, right? 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of the state legislature. Like, will we ever amend it again? The problem with a lot of these fights about, in a way, this book grew out of Winners Take All, which is to say, if billionaire-led change is fake change, what's real change? We got to do the other thing. I was advocating for something in that book, not just against something. But to do the other kind of thing, we need, in this system, which is an unfair system, where you have a Senate and you have all this kind of things to amplify a diminishing white minority and all these other mechanisms in place, accepting that as reality, we have to build sometimes enormous supermajority coalitions to change some of the basic operating system of this country, right? And so that's where the notion of having to win these arguments comes in. And sometimes, and I write about this in the book, I think folks who are pushing for a kind of progressive vision of the future overestimate, partly because of where we live and who we're around, overestimate how won the argument is already. The argument isn't won about a lot of these things. I mean, I want to get rid of money in politics. And I think a majority of Americans wants to limit it or get rid of it. But I don't think we've won the argument in the kind of decisive way that has been won in other countries, right? I wrote a book trying to discredit billionaires. I mean, I tried, but I don't think I have won that argument in America. You don't hear French people defending their billionaires. Like, people on the right in France don't defend their billionaires. It's just not a thing, right? Here, we got our thousandaires just defending billionaires all day long, right? So I want to change those material conditions, but I'm in an argument with my fellow citizens that I haven't won yet.
Yes, please.
Hi, I was curious about your opinion on kind of the ethics of persuasive rhetoric itself. Like, as you say, Fox is a fantastic persuasion machine, and politicians from time immemorial know that appeals to emotion are sometimes more powerful than straight facts. So what do you think about kind of how far do we go in terms of truthiness versus straight facts, and where's the line of when it's not a fair fight, even if the other side is doing the same thing?
It's such
Is it okay to lie to persuade?
No. But I'm glad you clarified. No, that's such a... Sometimes you get a question that just gets to like one of the core things of the book, and that's such a powerful question. I had a really interesting debate about your question that I didn't expect to have. Great professor Noam Chomsky did a book launch event for me like a couple days before the book came out. And I thought it was going to be, he said he liked the book on email, and we're doing this thing. And then we're doing this event. And he really like kind of aired, and you can see this on YouTube, like he kind of aired this like deep inner conflict he was having that was exactly what you said, which is basically he wants everyone in my book to win. Right? This is like his squad. This is like his fantasy football team, my characters in this book, right? Noam is clearly on team everyone in this book. However, and this is so interesting, it's also his generation, right? He was like, I associate persuasion, a lot of things I advocate in the book, appealing to emotion, story. I'm not saying anything about lying. I'm not for lying. But I am for, in the book, appealing to emotion, right? Telling better stories, and so on and so forth. And he said, I grew up 50s, 60s with like, that's advertising. That's Coca-Cola. That's propaganda. That's Cold War stuff, right? And that was such an interesting pushback. And so he says, I understand narrowly what you're saying, and he's like, I think it's true, as I argue in the book, that like Bernie Sanders might well have become president if he'd been able to have more of a narrative, an emotional strategy, if he'd actually told people about what got him into that fight, and so on and so forth. Or, I think something like Build Back Better, if it was not like one of the worst named things ever, if it was actually like, understood to be something that would have given millions of people teeth for the first time and given millions of children the first taste of clean water they'd ever had, or would have given millions of old people sight that they had lost 20 years ago for the first time, if it had been understood for the vividness of what it actually offered, I'm one of these people who thinks it might have, had a better fate. But he says, when I look at these things, I get scared that like Madison Avenue is being brought to, and it was a really interesting tension. And what I would say my line is, the line for me is like lying bad, I think lying is like one really simple way to just, like if you're saying things that are not true, that should not be in it. Short of that, I actually think there is and you may disagree with me on this, a catastrophic dismissal on the political left of things like appealing to emotion as sort of being the same as lying, or appealing to narrative as being the same as lying. And a lot of the people I talk to, in some deep, sometimes unspoken place, sometimes spoken through conversation, there's just this feeling people have that all of that stuff is in a general bucket of like lower order human behaviors. And I think if you've actually spent time with regular people, you will know that while lying is bad, thinking appealing to emotion is bad tells me you don't get out much, right? And as the Democratic Party has basically stopped being a labor-affiliated party, which is kind of what it used to be, and this has happened around the world. These are all labor parties. They're really not labor parties anymore in many places. It's become a party of affluent, college-educated, and particularly people who are in charge of it and writing these messages are like Ivy League grads, very smart people. But I think the kind of people least likely to think that emotion is how people make decisions. So there's a way in which, around the world, I think a lot of the political left lives in a fantasy land in which voters are sitting around kitchen tables, like with like a Plato book cracked open on one hand, and their medical bills in front of them, and the policy programs of different primary candidates And then they're just like, okay, I should do Warren because it'll actually reduce my, medical bill. And it's just not how people are. It's not how people are. And there's nothing lower or beneath you in saying, for example, I'll just stick with the Bernie example because he's one of the people I write about. Whatever you think of Bernie got to a certain level of, a quite remarkable level of public support given a kind of cranky 70-something democratic socialist in the United States of America, right? 25%, which in a primary is pretty good. But there was everyone in the campaign who I talked to for the book, there was that next 5 or 10% that would have been really important, and then like another next 5 or 10% that would have been decisive. And they were thinking about how do you get that. Bernie's mom died when he was like 17 or 18, in part not getting good health care. And Bernie's signature domestic issue was health care. And Bernie almost never told, does anybody here know that story? Think about this. This guy, how many debates did you watch, right? This guy's signature domestic issue was, the way I would tell it, avenging his dead mother who died right before he's going to go to college. He never told anybody. His father's family, not his father, but a lot of his father's relatives, were murdered in Europe in the Holocaust as Jews. He was running, potentially, to run against Donald Trump. And he never made the connection to, I know what it's like to be up against Nazism in a democracy. My family knows what it's like, and here's why. So that's just one example. I could pick Biden, it's not about progress. If we are in this kind of existential fight for democracy, for freedom, for expanding the blessings of liberty to more people, and the other side has got persuasion engines, it's got, physical door-to-door operations, it's got this self-confidence in the ability of fear and lies to appeal to people. And then you're offering people policy pamphlets. You're asking for a very dangerous future. And so I deeply think, maybe if there was one thing I wanted to shake people's shoulders on, we have to get over this notion that appealing to emotion, that appealing to story, that meeting people where they are in the actual way in which people form political consciousness, that there's anything wrong about it, there's anything beneath us. In fact, that's where real politics begins.
We have 2 final questions. Yes, Missy, please.
Missy Rennie, I'm sort of want to go back to the listening part and talking part, and so I'm going to be very specific. Hamlin College, showing a picture of the prophet, taking people through that process. Can you just break that down in terms of what kind of lens you would put on what happened there?
Great. I have to say, I know the very broad outlines of that story. I don't know every detail. But I would just go back to Loretta's point, that there's no process in most institutions for a moment like that. So our options are doing nothing or pylons. And I think if your options for situations involving essentially the inevitable endemic conflict of a multiracial, multi-religious society, if your options are erasure and silence or mob pylons, you're not serving anybody. And I think we have to understand that we're trying to do a very hard thing in this country by having people from every single precinct of the world share space. My family's from India. We just spent 3 weeks in India. India's great, but India's largely a country for Indian people. India's not a country made of the world. No shade to India. That's not its history. It's got its own challenges. We're trying to do a hard thing. We're trying to do a thing that I would argue actually has no precedence in the world. And I would actually further argue, slightly more shakily, no real evidence that it works. Because we haven't really properly done it yet. We're actually quite in the early stages of actual multiracial democracy. And so an incident like that, or any of the number of incidents that Loretta is encountering when she's teaching on a college campus, to me is emblematic of a kind of friction that you're going to have if you're trying to build a society that looks like a New York subway car on the scale of a continent. And we need processes for actually addressing these things in a way that makes clear that they are problematic without having excommunication as the only tool available to us to get where we're going.
Final question, please.
Thanks very much. My question is a little bit about the examples you've used today, and I look forward to reading your book. I haven't read it yet. I'm on board with your notion of we need to engage, and the way you've talked about this engagement is through conversation, through stories, through personal, through emotional connections. But as the Hamline University example shows, the conversation in the classroom broke down, and then the incident blew up, not in conversation one-on-one, but in a kind of social media firestorm. So how do we reconcile what your, I think, very noble and engaging and inspiring approach is to say, let's talk to our neighbors, let's engage with difference one-on-one, when we live in an environment where the conversation isn't one-on-one, it's, 10 million to 12 million, and it rapidly goes like that. So how do we scale this conversation? And how do we build conversations knowing that our kind of partners in conversation or our opponents in conversation are in a vastly different scale of operations?
Yeah, that is such a good question and a great place to land. Look, I don't think we are going to, and I say this as a Twitter addict, maybe like in partial recovery, I don't think we're going to tweet our way to the kind of America that I was describing, the kind of America we need and deserve. And I think an interesting thing that happened in recent years, and I am maybe more guilty than anybody in this room of this, is overestimating the degree to which those kinds of conversations could be part of getting where we needed to go. I think those conversations they're certainly part of something. And they're not, for example, I spent 11 years at the New York Times, but for the last 6 years, I've been an independent writer and just doing these books, and I wouldn't be able to do that without social media, right? Like, social media is powerful enough that I can, not be at the New York Times and still tell people what I think, and not just speak once every 4 years when I drop a book. It's real, my life would not be possible. I wouldn't be able to be an independent writer. So I don't think we should, get off it. But I think there was, particularly for movements that want to change this country, there was an overestimation of the utility of that space for doing the work of moving people, when in fact it's better at a bunch of other things. It's better at, some of the generative pylons that actually help move consciousness. I mean, the Me Too movement is a very generative example of a lot of people saying, literally, Me Too. And that kind of mass upswell of people having a shared experience could not happen through letters to the editor, right? So there's very powerful things that come from this. But it's not discourse. It's not conversation. It's not designed for me to try to change your mind or for you to attempt to be open to have your mind changed. And so I think one thing that's going to be crucial is figuring out for all of us, whether you're in charge of an organization or just an individual, what is your IRL, in real life, plan for civically engaging people in your society on the road to where we're trying to go. And I'll tell you in closing about the way I end the book, is about an extraordinary movement. Some of you who do this work will know about deep canvassing. How many of you have heard about deep canvassing? This is like a very sophisticated room full of experts on these things. Deep canvassing is the opposite of social media. It is people going door to door in this country. It started with gay activists in LA after the stinging defeat of the referendum in 2008. And they looked at the map and they lost LA County in 2000. They didn't just lose rural California. They didn't just lose old people in California. Like, Los Angeles seems like a relatively decent place to be a gay person. Not according to the polling that came out, not according to the voting that happened in 2008. And these activists looked around their grocery stores after that vote and were like, in all likelihood, that man standing next to me at the produce aisle thinks I'm not a human being. That's a revelation. They wondered suddenly who their neighbors were. And so these activists began in a kind of inchoate way at the time, and since now very developed set of protocols, a process called deep canvassing, where starting with, they actually wanted to know, and again, this is not for everybody. Most gay people do not need to and should not go door to door trying to investigate homophobia. But this is for a group of gay activists who were tough, who had done that work, who were coming in prepared, who had had experience of things that led them to know what they were doing in that situation. And they developed this thing of going door to door and doing the opposite of what we do in social media, strategically listening, eliciting. And their theory was, you got some bile in you about gay people, or pick whatever issue they now work on. Their view was that bile is finite. You got some more bile? Okay, give me all your bile. You think gay people are dangerous to children? Okay, what else you got? What else you got? More bile, more bile. I got another bucket in the car. You can. At some point, the bile actually runs out. There's only so many stupid talking points people have absorbed from some television network or email forwards from their uncle. And space opens up. And what these canvassers did that was radical and revolutionary, but all of you can go do in your own lives right now, is that they refrained from the temptation at that moment to implant their opinion about gay people or whatever into the heads of the people standing in front of them. Their theory of change was, I think that person standing there has some other things going on in them, other forces battling for their soul that are not winning right now. If they're saying those things about gay people, there are some forces in their heart that are losing a battle for that heart. And I want to equip those forces to win the battle for that person's heart. What are those? What could those forces be? A lot of Americans, people who support the Mets, for example, have an image of themselves. I'm being serious. This is like really the kind of stuff they work with. Have an image of themselves as supporting underdogs. Now you may laugh about it. You think homophobia on the one hand and loving underdogs on the other, different scale. Not different scale. These are two self-images people have, right? I don't like gay people, but I always stand up for the people who have it hard in a situation. And what the canvassers saw and have built this entire incredibly successful program on is they saw that self-image, for example, of liking underdogs. They saw it as being something that hadn't yet come into conversation in that person's head with their homophobia. These were just separate facets of them. And what they saw their role as being to do was to put those factions of that person's heart into conversation. They do it at the door. They don't erase, they don't let things go, but they do it in a way where they're eliciting. And it has been studied by political scientists. It is a peer-reviewed thing. And half an hour on the door, these people are able to achieve progress on gay rights, trans rights, immigrant rights. that can take years through of just kind of diffuse social change. It's a remarkable effort. So go study deep canvassing. And I'll just say in closing, the larger lesson I learned from watching them and others in the book is that they actually had an appreciation which I sometimes find myself kind of forgetting the background fact behind which all of this work is taking place, which is that we're attempting to do something incredibly hard and awesome in this country right now, right? To go back to my India point or my China. China's not trying to build a nation of the world. No shade. It's just not what it's trying to do. If you go to Europe, they have good safety nets, right? But those are white countries. Those are white countries with carefully managed minority populations that are quite clearly staying where they are, right? I thought America was bad at looking at itself until you talk to French people about the colonial history or British people about the monarchy, as we've been seeing, right? So, you know, Canada has like 1 or 2 cities in the whole country that are majority minority. Most of our big cities are majority minority. We are on a qualitatively different path than any big country in the world. Building a country made of the world, a country of people of every background, every religion, every race. It is really, really hard and unprecedented what we are trying to do. We are falling on our face right now, to be sure, because we are jumping high, I believe. And we don't tell this story. Those of us who want that future of progress, we start with the story of what Donald Trump is doing or the backlash. Donald Trump is a barnacle on our progress. I'm serious. Donald Trump is not the protagonist of this story. And so when I look at what the canvassers are doing and these other persuaders are doing, I see a longer arc of American history in which there has always been, recurringly, these questions of do we extend the blessings of liberty and justice to more people or not? This was the question with slavery, and there was a faction that thought slavery should go on. This was the end of the 19th century, Industrial Revolution, yawning inequality, first labor protections. This faction thought, no, we shouldn't do labor protections. Women's suffrage comes up. This faction thought, no, women shouldn't vote. The New Deal comes along. Nope, we shouldn't have unions, we shouldn't have Social Security, we shouldn't have any kind of safety net. Integration comes up in the 50s and 60s. This faction says, no, we should not have racial integration. 1965, should we have immigrants from all around the world or just white countries? This faction says, no, just white countries. Right? War on poverty, should we do that? No, the faction doesn't want to do that. Should we liberate LGBT folks over the last generation? This group says no to that. And I don't mean to be rude, but this group, over the long run, has lost every single battle for the country's soul. And we don't tell this story. We tell the story of how imperiled we are. Look, the issue is, do you have 2-year backlashes or do you have 60-year backlashes? Because we've had both. That's the issue. But the issue is not whether that movement is building some beautiful, glorious future. It's not. It is literally a movement of backlash, not frontlash. And so I think it's important to center the story of what we're trying to do. And then remember that it is hard because it is hard. It is hard because we are actually trying in this moment to invite people to recognize a range of gender diversity and love diversity that all of our ancestors were pretty terrible about in most places on this planet, right? Like, we are doing something here. We're doing something here. We're building a country that is worth achieving and worth fighting for. And it's going to take a certain amount of doggedness, but also mercy, and fundamentally, I think, a faith in the possibility of persuasion to get there.
Thank you, Anand Giridharadas.
Thank you all.
So we want you to get the book, but actually, the book is free outside, and he's already signed it, so
Book
please
for you, a book for you.
grab a
for
book.
you.
Thank you all very, very much.